Reacting to your MMA hot takes. Now, I have selected 10 hot takes out of the near 500 people that sent me in hot takes that I thought were really, really good. I looked at them all, the private messages, the comments. I thank you all very much to everyone who sends them me on TikTok. And if you want to see your hot takes in my videos, go over to my TikTok, follow it, and then private message me or drop a comment in some of my videos and you might get them in. This is a series I do every week. If I didn't pick your hot take, it's nothing personal, all right, people? But I just picked the hot takes that I wanted to talk about the most, so don't take it personally. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. So, without further ado, let's go to Aiden Summerfield, who says, Jack Della Maddalena beats Islam quite comfortably and can become a top 3 welterweight GOAT of all time. So, I'm going to get your last part of your question. I'm going to put it on the shelf. And I'm going to wait and see how that flower blossoms. All right, people. I'm going to wait and see the result of Islam and JDM. If JDM can beat Islam, and he does beat Islam, I'm going to say yes to that question. If he doesn't, I'm going to say no to that question. We're going to see how good JDM is in this fight, is basically where I'm going with this. Because Islam's a really tough fight for him, and same with JDM, vice versa. Now, this fight for me is very underrated. I feel like it gets a lot of hype, but because it's not Ilya in Islam, people I feel like are more disappointed by it because it's not as big as the super fight. But it's still arguably a harder fight for Islam, being the smaller man moving up against a boxer with great takedown defence, JDM. It's very hard for Islam to beat JDM. I'd put it more towards 50-50 this fight, or maybe like a 60-40% chance for Islam, or 55-40%, 45% chance for JDM. It's a very close fight. Very close fight on paper. JDM's the bigger man going into this fight. One punch knockout power. Long. Great in either stance. Great guard. Great at pocket exchanging. Great shots to the body. Excellent takedown defence. He doesn't get discouraged by being taken down either. Even with a broken arm against Gilbert Burns, he dogs it out. Makes that pre-fight adjustment to land the knee up the middle. Gets Burns out of there. Basil Hafez, steroided up in their fight. Juiced up. You know, kind of bulldozes into JDM. Smashes him against the cage. Easily, JDM, as a hype train back then, could have got discouraged by Basil Hafez doing that to him and kind of let the fight get away from him. But instead, he stood his base. Worked on the takedown defence, got up off his back and punished Hafez in the exchanges. Every single time Hafez looked to disengage with JDM and reset from his takedown attempts, JDM punished him for it. He got right back on him. And that's something Islam's going to really struggle with. Because even a guy like Volk, when Islam fails a takedown attempt on a guy like Volk, Volk will reset after that. And then they'll kind of both reset and they'll get back to working and feinting. Whereas if you try to take down JDM and you fail, JDM's right on you from the minute you try to reset. So that's something Islam's going to struggle with, especially with the physicality of JDM. And Islam has said he's struggling to bulk up to 170. So he's the smaller man going in there against these guys. He does have extremely elite level grappling though. And here's why I pick Islam to beat JDM. Not just fight IQ, which I think Islam has more of than JDM. Not just skill all around as an MMA fighter. But Islam Makhachev, for me, is one of those fighters where you see JDM defending Belal Muhammad's takedowns and you think, oh, that stops Islam. He stops Islam Makhachev's takedowns too. Don't fall into that trap. That's what I tell myself when it comes to this fight, because I rewatched the Belal Muhammad and JDM fight not long ago. And the way JDM suffocated Belal each time Belal failed a takedown attempt, the way JDM actually discouraged Belal from shooting in on him was elite level. He brought Belal into his world. I don't think it was just that Belal fought the wrong game plan, although there was a bit of that. He didn't shoot enough takedowns, but that was just because JDM brought Belal's ego out and brought Belal into his world where he was trying to exchange with him. And he did a great job at defending Belal's takedowns. Belal is not Islam Makhachev. Even as good as Belal Muhammad's wrestling is, he's not a submission threat. He's not a finishing threat on the ground. Islam is an elite level grappler in MMA. And I think people are going to be very surprised the difference between Islam shooting in on JDM and Belal shooting in on JDM. That's all I'm going to say about this fight. Now, does JDM have Craig Jones in his corner? Yes, he is the ultimate Dagestani takedown defence recipe. right, to even up the odds in those kind of fights. Does JDM have a link up with Volkanovski in his training camp? Volk, who can share his experience with Islam Makhachev? Yes. Yes, he does. These are things that I think are worrying signs for JDM potentially beating Islam. If you're an Islam Makhachev fan, which I am, I'm a JDM fan and an Islam fan. I like them both. Whoever wins, I'm happy with. Can JDM beat Islam? Yes. Is it nearing 50-50? Yes. I'd slightly edge it to Islam, but you guys let me know what you think in the comments. Paul sent me in a comment which has really good reasoning, and that's why I wanted to include it in this video. He gave a lot of detailed explanations. You'll have it up on the screen already for you. But he basically said Charles Oliveira's style is outdated, and he gave some really good reasonings, such as... And he's not the only one. You'll see another Oliveira take in this video. And I think the Oliveira sort of... It's not... I wouldn't call it slander, but kind of slander is seeping through, especially after his performance against Ilia Topuria. And it wasn't a good performance. It is what it is. Here's my thing. Charles Oliveira's style is outdated. His style is ineffective against Ilia Topuria. But that does not mean his style is outdated. For me. Now, is he a better fighter than Ilia? No. Is he a better fighter than Islam? No. And you made some really good points in this comment, Joe. You were talking about Islam Makhachev out-grappling Charles, and people like to mention, well, Islam only submitted Charles because he rocked him and dropped him, and he was able to follow him to the ground and then submit him. But Islam, even in the first round, was getting the better of Charles there. It was pretty close. A lot of people think if you're on top, that means you're absolutely dominating the fight. But Oliveira was making it very difficult for Islam to really establish anything in the first round on the ground. But Islam he was ahead. Good top control, decent transitions. He struggled there with Oliveira. It was a pretty interesting first round. And then in the second round, Islam swarmed Oliveira with his quick combinations. Outstruck him. You know, he did. Dropped him on the feet. Comfortable on the feet too for Islam it was in that fight, which surprised me the most because Oliveira really put it on Islam. And actually, to be fair, like I mentioned with JDM earlier, Oliveira was someone that, even if he wasn't getting the better of Islam on the ground, he's not discouraged by it and he's going to keep pressing forward. And Islam dealt with that pretty effectively. Actually, that's kind of mirroring the JDM point. Oliveira tried to drag Islam in a really uncomfortable fight, and Islam stayed composed, he stuck to his game plan, and he finished Charles Oliveira. Is Oliveira a better fighter than Islam? No. Is Oliveira a better fighter than Ilia? No. He is still a top level fighter. Styles make fights, guys. Still a top level fighter. Styles make fights. He didn't just lose to Islam because his style's outdated, or Ilia because his style's outdated. At the end of the day, Styles make fights, and someone like Ilia Topuria, who cleaned him out in the first round, just has a terrible style for Charles. There's something to be said around maybe his style being outdated in the sense that he's fought the same way for so long that now the blueprint's out there to beat him, and Ilia Topuria was kind of like, what do you call it? The cherry on top, let's call it. The cherry on top, where it kind of felt like that way of fighting for Oliveira was eventually leading up to the Ilia Topuria fight. And eventually that outcome of Oliveira getting knocked out by somebody, getting dropped by somebody, and he doesn't recover and he doesn't get up, was kind of inevitable. I don't mind looking at it that way, but, you know, Oliveira can still beat a lot of lightweights. He can still beat a lot of lightweights. It's going to be tough for him because the blueprints are kind of out there to beat him now. So maybe his style is outdated, actually, in that kind of sense. But do I think it's sort of like unevolved or not a good style to beat a lot of lightweights still to this day? No. So I kind of agree and I kind of don't agree in many senses. But there's a pretty good reasoning from Joel. Next one is, of course, prime Kamaru Usman has a better legacy than Anderson Silva. No, he doesn't. And here, right, Anderson Silva got popped for PDs. So if you want to include Usman in your GOAT debate over Anderson Silva for that reason, I understand. So yeah, in that kind of sense, Usman is greater than Anderson Silva. Anderson Silva has 16 good wins in his UFC career. Kamaru Usman has 10. Kamaru Usman has a lot of good wins. Sean Strickland, Leon Edwards, Damian Maia, Rafael Dos Anjos, Tyron Woodley, Colby Covington, Jorge Masvidal, and Gilbert Burns, and actually Joaquin Buckley. That win was a great win for Usman, coming off a big layoff, being written off by everybody. He even gave Khamzat Chimaev a pretty hard fight. But Anderson Silva was so good for his time and so ahead of his time. He makes his elite level wins look pretty bad. Like, he makes his elite level wins look like they didn't belong in there with him. Because they didn't. Because his style was ahead of its time. But this is the thing that people, I think, get wrong about the older generation of fighters, like GSP or Anderson Silva. Yes, Stephan Bonner was an under-evolved, bang-average MMA fighter for today's standards, right? That's harsh to say, but it's true. The sport has evolved past someone like Stephan Bonner or Forrest Griffin, who did not belong in there with Anderson Silva. But at that time, they did belong in there with Anderson Silva in the build-up to the fight, and they were considered great wins. I bet I wasn't around at this time, really. I was a young lad. I wasn't watching MMA. But I bet when Anderson Silva beat Stephan Bonner, I bet everyone was saying, oh my God, look at the way Stephan Bonner just couldn't get near him. Or Forrest Griffin, look at that. Who does that to Forrest Griffin? Well, actually, many fighters of today could do that to Forrest Griffin. But Chael Sonnen, for example, he would be a probably outside the top 15 ranked middleweight in today's standards, I think. Maybe that's a little bit harsh. Chael's quite big for the division, so maybe he could do decently well. But pretty one-dimensional wrestler. Pretty one-dimensional. He gave Anderson Silva a really hard fight in the first fight, dominated him for 24 minutes, and Anderson Silva, Hail Mary, found a triangle, which submitted him. He beat Chael Sonnen in the rematch a little bit more comfortably after a rocky first round. Nice knees to the middle, TKOs him. Those two wins over Chael Sonnen are as good as the two wins Usman had over Colby. Now, is Colby a better fighter than Chael Sonnen? Yeah. Skill for skill, he was. In fact, he was more of a cat. He was actually, when you think about it, it's quite similar because outspoken trash talker like Chael Sonnen, good wrestling like Chael Sonnen, not much of a submission threat, right, compared to someone like Sonnen, or a ground and pound finisher compared to someone like Sonnen. But he had that cardio wrestling style Sonnen had, Colby Covington. So you can compare it. Colby's a better fighter, Chael Sonnen, and will go down in history as a better fighter than Chael Sonnen. Maybe not a greater fighter or somebody that had better wins than Chael, because he didn't. But he was better at that period of his career than Chael was when Anderson Silva beat Chael. But here's the thing. Here's what people get wrong about this. That doesn't mean Chael is less of a good win than Colby Covington was for Kamaru Usman. Because the older generation Anderson Silva might have beat only older generation style of fighters, but at that time, those fighters were still considered some of the best fighters in the world. It's just that Anderson was ahead of his time, so he makes them look like not good competition level fighters. Do you know what I'm trying to say? Like Frank Trigg lost to Matt Hughes. Frank Trigg would not be anywhere near the top welterweight rankings of today's standards, but Frank Trigg was a top welterweight back then. We've got to put respect on Anderson Silva's resume because people don't realise how dominant he was for his time. Yes, these guys didn't belong in the octagon with him, but that goes to show how good he was for his time. And this is what I think people get wrong about this take. So I don't agree. Anderson Silva, if you look at his resume, has 16 good wins in his career. If you look at how those fighters were considered at that time. Right? Usman also had a great career. So if you want to put Usman in there because he had a great career and Anderson Silva popped for PDs, I don't mind. But was Kamaru Usman greater than Anderson Silva if you include PD users and you just look at the resumes? No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Anderson Silva is one of the greatest fighters of all time, and I think he's become criminally underrated, and I think people really look at the way they rank GOATs in the wrong way, in my opinion. He says, Ilia Topuria is the best fighter of all time. Not the GOAT yet, but the best in terms of skill level. I think a lot of people will agree with this, so maybe it isn't a hot take per se, but I wanted to give my thoughts on it. Is he the best fighter I've ever seen? He is. Joint with Khabib. I might still slightly have Khabib a little bit above that Ilia Topuria level. Khabib was, for me, the best fighter I've ever seen in terms of just dominance. And as short as his career was, as short as his legacy was, he is the best fighter I've ever seen, just in terms of that free fight run between McGregor, Gaethje and Poirier, where I'm like, God, each fight it was like, I've mentioned this before, but Poirier's a combination puncher, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He'll be able to stuff the takedowns and Khabib won't be able to handle his combinations. Dominated. Gaethje, Division 1 wrestler. Khabib won't be able to take him down and Gaethje's got the power and leg kicks on the feet and he just absolutely dominated Tony Ferguson. Khabib mopped him. Conor McGregor, biggest star in the UFC, coming off a big fight with Floyd Mayweather. Yes, he was drinking in the build-up, and some people do debate whether or not he was fully committed, but that was a grudge match. I truly believe, especially age-wise, that was still a prime McGregor. Khabib dominated him for the most part. That free fight run was just absolutely insane. Absolutely insane. That was an insane free fight run. Absolutely insane. So Khabib's the best fighter I've ever seen as of right now. Is Ilia Topuria the best boxer I've ever seen in MMA? Yes. The way he distributes weight between his punches. I think Ilia will go down as a pioneer for striking. I actually do think that. I don't know if this is a hot take, but I guess this can be my personal hot take. I think Ilia Topuria is going to go down as a pioneer for the sport in terms of the way he boxes and the fact that he's myth-busted boxing in MMA. Because for years, people said, you can't rotate in your punches the same way boxers do with your hips. I'm sat down so you can't really see me doing it. You can't rotate when you throw a hook, or you can't rotate when you throw an uppercut the same way you can in boxing as you can in MMA because the leg kicks, or, you can't come into a boxing fight in a boxing stance because of the calf kicks and you're open for a single leg and you're more flat-footed. Well, Ilia Topuria has blended his base Greco-Roman wrestling style with his new boxing style and he's adapted into MMA really nicely. And I think it shows if you are a great grappler, you can box in fights like that. He couldn't do it if he had no wrestling or no jiu-jitsu. He just couldn't. Because yes, boxing styles and boxing stances are open to leg kicks and they are open to takedowns. But if you have that base and you have that style and you blend that with somebody who has one-punch knockout power and great boxing on the feet with a pretty good chin, with a great chin in fact, that's a recipe for disaster for most lightweights and welterweights or featherweights that do not know how to box like that, who do not know how to put weight into the punches like that, who do not know to when they throw a lead hook to the body to angle out slightly and then create distance for the right straight from the side, who can pivot in between the shots like that. They don't know how to deal with it. So I think Ilia Topuria right now is already pioneering the next generation of MMA fighters that on the inside, if you have great grappling, if you have good durability, you can box like that. So I think Ilia Topuria is a pioneer, and I think he certainly is one of the best fighters and maybe the second best fighter I've ever seen. So it's not that I don't necessarily agree with your take. I actually agree in many ways, but just maybe it's nostalgia bias, but I would just slightly edge Khabib at the moment. But we'll see. Ilia Topuria's still got time left in his career. He still does, so I think that's a pretty good take. Dog says, MMA hot takes, you say. Holloway over Khabib on the GOAT list. Now, you are, right, here's the thing. I've said this before, I don't have a GOAT list. I guess I kind of do because I ranked Anderson Silva over Kamaru Usman. So I guess I kind of have guys that I consider better than other guys in my own head. But respect to anyone who's had a great career in MMA. I don't want to seem like before I was discrediting Usman or I'm trying to discredit Khabib. I just said Khabib's the best fighter I've ever seen. But as we all know, Khabib's run at the top was dominant, it was fantastic, and it was that good. Despite the fact it was so short, it's going to be remembered forever, in my opinion. But Holloway has beaten so many good fighters. He's been a UFC world champion. He had a good run as a champion too. If he loses, though, to Dustin Poirier for a third time, and he has lost to Volkanovski 3 times. First and second fights were pretty close, but I thought Volk won. And I thought Volk even won the second fight, clearly in my mind, each time I watch it. Pretty close fight, but I think Volt won all three. And then the third was a shutout. Poirier, if he beats Holloway for a third time, that's not going to look good on Max Holloway's resume. Losing to two different fighters 3 times is never a good look, in my opinion, for somebody all time. That might be a hot take. That might be a hot take. And I understand the context that Poirier beat Max Holloway the first time on his UFC debut. The second time was sort of on short notice. And the third time, Poirier would be out of his prime, but kind of has nothing left to lose. And Holloway might be severely declined after getting knocked out for the first time in his career by Ilia Topuria. So each fight in this Dustin Poirier trilogy has actually come at quite a bad time for Max Holloway, in my opinion, and more of a favourable time each time for Dustin Poirier. But if you look at it face value, the Volk fights and the Dustin Poirier fights, if Holloway loses to Dustin Poirier a third time, I don't think it looks good for him at all time. I think that'll be used against him when people rank him or try and rank him in the top 10, especially above Khabib, who, against his biggest threats, yes, his career was a lot shorter, he dominated and dealt with. But Max Holloway, in terms of a more stat resume, oh yeah, well, of course it's levels above Khabib. That's objective. That's not even a hot take. It is better. But I just think it's something to bear in mind if Holloway loses to Poirier, how differently I think Holloway's career might be viewed, as great as it has been. James says, Ilia can beat any welterweight you put him up against. I don't agree. Ilia Topuria, people sometimes, height does matter. Height does matter in fighting. Anybody that has, sparred somebody who is of your skill level or your experience and is a lot taller than you knows, height does matter. Height is an advantage. Reach especially is an advantage. Ilia Topuria would be very small moving up to welterweight, right? Could you imagine Ilia Topuria scrambling with Kamaru Usman? Right, you've seen them train together and Ilia looked like he was clearly a better boxer than Usman, right? And it looked like even if they were going full power, Ilia would give Usman trouble on the feet. But could you imagine Ilia scrambling with Usman at welterweight? He can put the size on, and he's more than skilled enough, I think, to still even compete with some welterweights. But I don't think he becomes welterweight champion. I think there's a certain level of weight, guys that are Ilia Topuria's size, naturally, that optimally compete at featherweight and lightweight. They struggle if they move up and put too much weight on, where they're going to be slowed down, they're not going to be as fast, they're already a lot shorter and a lot less reach and a lot less heavy, naturally and optimally competing at welterweight than, let's say, an Ian Gary. Because Ilia Topuria is better than Ian Gary as a fighter, but would he beat Ian Gary? Right, he has better striking than Ian Gary, and he has better wrestling and grappling than Ian Gary. So you could look at it and go, yeah, Ilia would beat Ian Gary, but Ian Gary's a lot longer, a lot taller, and he has the natural ability and size and dexterity to optimally perform at welterweight. I keep saying that word. But just because Ilia is skilled enough to go up there doesn't mean he can actually perform to his best up there. If he's having to bulk up, he's already a lot smaller than these guys. He has to bulk up. He's probably going to be slower. He's probably not going to be as fast. So it might hurt him. He might gas out because he's so powerful and he's used to exploding and getting rid of guys. He might gas out with that extra added size put onto him. He might not function at that division in a way that's high level or optimal. So I think that's just something to bear in mind if Ilia ever does move up. But yeah, he's skilled. He's probably one of the best fighters I've ever seen. But I still don't think he could go up to welterweight and compete and be at his absolute best. I think there's a level of size that Ilia Topuria performs well at versus kind of being slowed down because he has to bulk up. He's kind of what I'm saying is, in the long-winded way, is that extra added weight for someone as small as Ilia Topuria might make him worse, not better. I feel like welterweight might be a step too far, but it's kind of a long-winded way of saying it. I'm sorry, I kind of yapped on there, but you guys let me know what you think of that take. Caden says, Pantoja has surpassed DJ in the GOAT status. Demetrius Johnson has 12 UFC championship wins. 11 title defences consecutively. He was a one champion too. I think that does matter. Because sometimes people look at one championship and that skill level there is good. Adriano Moraes is a good fighter, a lot bigger than DJ too, and DJ beat him. So as a mixed martial artist, as a legendary fighter, and as a better fighter than Pantoja, I have to disagree. Pantoja has beat better competition, you could certainly argue, and he is dominant for his division. But people sometimes gloss over 11 title defences without really absorbing that number. 11 title defences consecutively is absolutely insane. That is absolutely insane. That is absolutely insane. That is a ridiculous amount of longevity. That is not been replicated yet. John Jones has done it. John Jones has been popped for PEDs. Demetrius Johnson never got popped. He might have taken stuff for all I know. I don't know. But he never got popped. He's had ridiculous amounts of longevity. His title performances were some of the best we've ever seen. And I see some people like going over like Ray Borg and saying like, look what he did to Ray Borg, but Ray Borg was not actually ever that good. Again, it's like, goes back to the Anderson Silva thing. Ray Borg was considered a very high-level contender at that point in Demetrius Johnson's career. You can only beat what's in front of you. And what he did to Ray Borg was ridiculous. He was ahead of his time. John Dodson, great win. Henry Cejudo, great win. Great win. Henry Cejudo's a better win for Demetrius Johnson than anyone Pantoja has beaten. So Pantoja is crafting to himself a very, very good resume. And if he can get to like 6 or 7 championship wins with the competition he's beaten, or maybe like 6, 7 title defences, maybe we can have this conversation. But for now, please don't forget how insane it is that Demetrius Johnson has 11 title defences and 12 championship wins with some of the most impressive championship performances in UFC history. Please don't ever forget that, because that guy is legendary. And for me, he's still the greatest flyweight of all time by far. Passion Fruit says, Oliveira is overrated. He quits very easily, and most of his biggest wins are flukes, and him getting lucky not actually being better. Right, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. Oliveira got cleaned out quite badly by Ilia Topuria, because styles make fights, and that's just the way the cookie crumbles. His biggest wins are not flukes. Dustin Poirier dropped him, Justin Gaethje dropped him, Michael Chandler dropped him, and they all nearly had him out of there. But in the end, with Michael Chandler, how did Oliveira knock out Michael Chandler? His hook was a lot more shortened and less winging than Michael Chandler's, and he set it up really well because Chandler was moving back in a straight line. That's not luck. Perfectly set up left hook, drops Chandler, he gets the TKO. Dustin Poirier, very good jiu-jitsu, an elite level fighter for lightweight, has some of the best lightweight wins of all time, just slightly lacks that world title to really put him as an all-time great. Dustin Poirier gave Oliveira a really hard fight, that's true. He ends up getting submitted. That's elite level jiu-jitsu from Oliveira to submit a guy like Dustin Poirier, which is not easy to do. Justin Gaethje, it's the same thing. Gaethje dropped Oliveira, hurt him, but ultimately Oliveira mixed it up as a mixed martial artist, dropped Gaethje with a beautiful play straight left hand, straight right hand, I believe it was. Off the top of my head, haven't watched that fight in a while, and then Oliveira submitted him, made Gaethje tap. Oliveira, when he quit against Max Holloway, which is the biggest example people use, I can't remember what it's called, but like anybody would have quit too. He couldn't breathe, right? He probably thought he was dying in that moment. So I don't really count that as Oliveira quitting. I just think that's like the human body saying, no, you've had enough. We're done now. You can't fight if you can't breathe at all, right? So I don't ever hold that against Oliveira. You can quit in your career for me. I don't care. You can do anything before your prime. But when you hit that prime and you're getting some of the wins Oliveira got in your career, that makes you elite level. And no one can ever take that away from him. No one can ever take that away from Oliveira. That run he went on from Chandler to Poirier to Gaethje, those are ridiculous wins. And I don't care what anybody says. I don't call Oliveira a quitter because Oliveira actually, in his career, went from being a quitter, went from being somebody that fades easy in fights and kind of gets trampled on, to a completely different animal later on in his career. Even guys that he got written off against, like Beneil Dariush. People like to say, like, the Dariush win wasn't that good. But the fact of the matter is this. Beneil Dariush was a big favourite over Oliveira going into their fight. Everyone thought Dariush was going to be, except me. I always picked Oliveira to beat Dariush. Everyone picked Dariush to beat Oliveira. Too powerful for Oliveira on the feet and his wrestling's too good. And Oliveira smoked him. So, especially the fights in his prime that people wrote him off in and he went in to win, Gaethje, Poirier, Dariush, those are elite level wins. Those are elite level wins. That career turnaround shows that that guy did not quit during his fights for me. That shows he did not quit during his fights for me. I think his wins were not flukes. I think Oliveira is now getting underrated because of the Ilia to Poirier fight. And man, I think it's a shame. Ilia had a hard style for him. Islam Makhachev had a hard style for him. That does not mean he's a quitter, or even if he was a quitter, you're not always a quitter. I hate that saying, once a quitter, always a quitter. Think back to anything in your life you've quitted. We've all quit at something. We've all quit at something. Just because you quit at something doesn't mean you can't pick it back up, or just because you quit at a lot of things in your life doesn't mean later on in your life you could become super resilient. I hate that saying. Once a quitter, always a quitter. Man, we've all quit at something. We've all quit at something. That doesn't mean you're always a quitter forever. I hate that saying. I really do hate that saying with a burning passion. And the Oliveira slander on this page will not be tolerated, people. All right. So then, the next one. That guy. This is a long one. Francis Ngannou is the most overrated fighter of all time. Rarely fought, robbed Gan, another awful fighter, doesn't have dominating or convincing wins over against prime fighters, which is not a bad point. Got slept by AJ, doesn't really matter, it's a different sport. Jones and Aspinall would have beat him. Right. Francis Ngannou, for me, is one of the most underrated fighters of all time. So I'm polar opposite to this comment. People treat Francis Ngannou like he was this big, swinging dum-dum. And at some fights he was. Jairzinho Rosenstrike, right, wasn't on Ngannou's level, so it kind of just felt like Ngannou knew, oh, I can just charge forward at this guy, and there's nothing he can do about it. That's what that fight kind of was, and that's what he did to him. With Anthony Joshua, it was in a different sport. It's in boxing. That's not Ngannou's sport. And he did arguably beat Tyson Fury, which was an insane fight. And yes, Fury overlooked him. As much as he said he didn't, he clearly did. But the fact that Ngannou was able to go in there and do that with Tyson Fury actually shows how good he was. To say that that's his boxing debut. And then with someone like Stipe Miocic wasn't in his prime when he fought Francis. But at the same time, still the greatest heavyweight of all time, still was the world champion at that point. And if you go look at the first fight, where Stipe outclassed him, and the second fight, look at the difference in composure, in skill, in all-around ability. He outgrappled Stipe in a moment in that fight. He head-kicked Stipe. He looked great in that fight. Cain Velasquez wasn't in his prime. Injuries had ruined his career at that point when Ngannou fought him, but he still slept him that quickly. Yes, Ngannou's power was freakish. Yes, he fought a lot of fighters out of the primes, but he can only beat what's in front of him. And for me, he's one of the most skilled heavyweights of all time. Like the Renan Ferreira fight, people were like, oh, Renan Ferreira's going to beat Ngannou because they're both wild, and Ngannou's coming off that knockout loss to AJ. But Ngannou showed fight IQ by quickly taking Renan down and finishing him there. With Cyril Gane, he had no knees against Gane, so he massively struggled to keep up with Gane's movement. But he still out-grappled Gane for the majority of that fight, again showing fight IQ. If he could move a bit more, I think he would have won more convincingly. And Gane is not an awful fighter either. I don't agree with that. Go look at how hyped Gane was going into that Ngannou fight, or the John Jones fight. Gane now becomes underrated because Jones destroyed him, and Volkov, got robbed against him. But the thing is, Gane was very hyped up in that moment in his career. And that was a good win for Enanu. Did Gan arguably win? Yes. But he had no legs in that fight, and he still made it work, arguably. Enanu, for me, people really underrate his skill. Really underrate his skill. He's not this big swinging dum-dum like everybody pretends he is. Has he fought that way in fights? Yes. Against guys that he knew he could just destroy if he wanted to at any moment. Right? Which is even scarier. But against guys that he needed to be composed against guys that he needed to show his skill against, he has shown it in many fights. Many fights. So I don't agree with that either. I think Ngannou is one of the most skilled heavyweights of all time, and people need to realise that actually, in human history, people talk about John Jones. He arguably, in a room, you say, put somebody in a room and see who walks out. Ngannou in history might be that guy. He might be the baddest man ever. If you just talk about one-on-one, hand-to-hand combat, might be the baddest man ever. That's what I think about Francis Ngannou. But you guys let me know what you think in the comments. I think Ngannou's underrated, if anything. But yes, his wins, it's unfortunate the timing of them, because a lot of those guys weren't necessarily at their best. I do agree with you on that sense. But anyway, guys, thank you all very much for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments. Goodbye, everybody.